this is why Republicans are comfortable deporting undocumented workers now, because they have an alternative. There is now enough of a rental H-2A worker business to really replace undocumented workers. Hi, we're here with Kate Barr. She is currently running for Congress against
Tim Moore.
Kate Barr is phenomenal. We've been buds working political stuff in North Carolina for, I want to say some time, like what, probably 2 years now?
Yeah. You're an excellent house guest. You crashed in our guest room.
And your cabin that one time.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You were up in Asheville chainsawing some Hurricane Helene damage.
You're a wonderful host. Thank you. It was nice to have a place to go. The water was still out. There was power, though. Speaking of stuff Congress needs to work on. So we just wanted to talk about some of what's going on politically. We've got ICE in Minneapolis. There's a lot of news about that, and rightly so. We wanted to talk about how ICE was in North Carolina not too long ago and then bounced, and what is the difference between these two areas, what can explain it. A lot of it probably comes down to North Carolina as a purple state, and we can get into how that makes a difference. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff to unpack there. And then also, how did we come to this point where conservatives feel comfortable putting undocumented workers in jail because they have labor alternatives now? As someone in agriculture, I constantly hear people saying, but what are they going to do? How are they going to run their farms if they don't have labor? Honey, they already solved that. That's why they feel comfortable putting people in dungeons now who would have previously been their workers. So we need to unpack that and how North Carolina actually played a huge role in that happening. So we have a lot of folks in North Carolina who are very up in arms about ICE coming to town, but we've been laying the groundwork for that for decades. And we need to talk about how and why local and state level elections matter. They could have kept this from happening and we didn't use that lever. So how do we change that in the future? That's my monologue. Let's get into that.
I'm very excited to hear you talk about all of these things.
We can start with what you're doing.
Sure. So I ran for state senate at the same time you were running for commissioner of agriculture in 2024. I ran in an unwinnable district because it was gerrymandered out the wazoo. I ran as Kate Barr can't win.
What was the RD split typically in that district?
R plus 14, I think.
Okay. So very safe red seat.
Very safe red seat. So usually a stretch is like an R plus 3 and R plus 4. Like we'd call that like a recruit seat or a long shot. This coming cycle, maybe we're shooting for like R plus 7 and R plus 8 and just really hoping for that blue tsunami that everyone's counting on. But like R plus 14 is insane. And I know people are like, it's just 14 points. I hear that a lot, especially when you look at the distribution of people who have kind of made up their minds about what party they're voting for in these districts. It's practically impossible. So I ran that way and then felt frustrated because our current state legislature further gerrymandered our congressional maps, basically sold out North Carolina to get an endorsement from President Trump for the head of our state Senate's primary. And I got pissed about it, so I decided to run as a Republican in my congressional district. That's District 14's Republican primary, which is on March 3rd, because the district is gerrymandered, so it's a safe Republican seat in the general.
So the only election that really matters is the Republican primary.
Correct.
So show up there.
Yeah. It's sort of like, if that's how you're going to build the system, then okay, that's how we'll run. So I changed my voter registration, but nothing else about me has changed. And I'm not trying to pretend to be a Republican.
And how's that going? I heard your guy was actually kind of starting to sweat. How's that coming?
He seems to be really nervous. All we can figure is that he has done an internal poll that didn't show a result like he liked, because last week he was not campaigning, and this week he is working hard. He has gone door knocking, he's got yard signs, he's sending out mailers, he's got digital ads, like anti-Kate ads. And that is awesome. Like, that's a win kind of no matter what happens with me, because it means he's spending money in the Republican primary that he can't spend in the general election. So we're just like picking away at his advantage in every way we can.
That's great. Love to hear
it. It is so wonderful. It's very satisfying right now in these times where it feels like I can't do anything.
It's kind of interesting to see how, like, if you're like in the thick of a race, how your opponent responds to things sometimes. The guy I was running against last year, he's been incumbent for 20 years, right? And so he's never really had to break a sweat in re-election, except this time he did. It was so funny because I was talking to some farmers and they're like, oh yeah, he's calling us around and saying like, whoa, this one's qualified. We actually have to work this year. I need your money. I need your money. And then come 2 weeks before the election, they take all that money and they put it into ads to the general population who has never paid attention to agriculture. And what do the ads say? She has no idea what she's doing.
Right. And there's no truth here.
And the general public, which we can get into shortly, and just the importance of statewide elections, totally swallowed it because they don't understand agriculture. And they really felt like they were doing the right thing to defend farmers. And now we have what? How are farmers doing right now? A lot of the stuff I was running on was like, a Trump trade war is probably coming again. Let's focus on growing things that aren't going to be affected by that. And the farm sector actually hated hearing that, which was fascinating. We don't have time to unpack that right now. We're talking about ice.
It is super fascinating, and you should unpack that sometime.
It's kind of tough to do election postmortems because it's hard to kind of go, here's what went wrong, here's what happened in this race without making it really personal, which is something I'm like not really into.
There's like so much to be learned. It's like not a sour grapes situation. It's like, if we don't unpack this, then we can't get better.
Yeah. And the seat I was running for, actually, like, because it's a purple state, the seat I was running for, in theory, is completely winnable. But there's an interesting thing if you look at the voting dynamics. Democratic voters around Wake County love to vote for the Republican for agriculture, and I think labor as well. Here in North Carolina, in most states, you have the governor appoint people in cabinet level for the state positions. So the state secretary of agriculture, the state superintendent of education. Here in North Carolina, those positions are elected. The voters decide who that is. And so you'll often get a Democratic governor who wins by quite a bit, and then a lot of people switch over and vote Republican for those state level positions, and then they complain that the government never does anything. But there's a really strong pattern of that in North Carolina. The Democratic voters, specifically around Wake County, love to vote for the Republican for Commissioner of Agriculture because the mindset is Republicans understand agriculture. Also for labor, because the mindset is Republicans understand business and workplaces. And I'm really hoping that at this point in time, we can kind of move past the idea that Republicans are good at agriculture, because how's that working out for us?
It's just like these old tropes that we grew up with, that like Republicans, business and farmers, Democrats, like protest.
Yeah. Anyway, we're getting a little far afield. So what we want to talk about today is ICE. And again, how ICE came to North Carolina, bounced pretty quickly. What happened there? And I don't want to say like what Minnesota can learn from North Carolina, because they're two very different states. ICE is there for different reasons.
Yes.
And so you can't directly translate. I don't think it's appropriate for one state to go like, we did this and you should do that.
Yeah. And it's not like the Minnesotans aren't doing their best to get them out, but some of the stuff we did worked. Some of it, like you said, is because we are a purple state and there's greater risk to local elected officials from ICE being up to shenanigans.
Yeah.
And if there's something that somebody in Minnesota hears that they haven't tried before and they want to give it a go, that's awesome. We learned a lot from Chicago too. There was a lot of communication. Like, I'm around Charlotte, which is one of the places that ICE was working. And we were in constant communication with people in Chicago who were also pushing back to talk about what was working. And that helped a ton.
Like, to really quickly take it back to ICE's chair, the big nameplate reason is, right, like, oh, there was all this daycare fraud. It was like 258 million is the number they're throwing around. In North Carolina, sweet potato farmers billed taxpayers of $1 billion. That's the best estimate we can come up with, is $1 billion. Yeah. Sweet potato farmers in North Carolina cheated taxpayers out of $1 billion. That's way more than 250 million for those checking along with the math at home. And ICE never came here to check on anybody with fraud, right? Because the people who did it were landowning good old boys. What they did about that instead, the USDA prosecuted the people who did fraud, everybody that they could identify, recovered the cash as much as they could, and then they just updated the program to make it harder to do fraud. That's how you handle taxpayer fraud. You prosecute it, and then you change the program to make fraud harder to do. Paramilitary occupation is an interesting take. That's not going to cost you less money.
Right. Yeah. It's also not going to prevent the fraud.
Yeah, I'm sure there's no fraud going on in ICE whatsoever.
Absolutely not. It's a very clean organization, obviously.
Yeah, super running a tight ship over there. Really. So to kind of take it back to, you were mentioning learning some things from Chicago. Tell us about some of the things North Carolina did.
One of the things that we learned from Chicago, and these aren't like novel, brand new, nobody's ever tried them ideas, but we would find out where the ICE agents were staying. And folks had a rotation where they would drive back and forth in front of that hotel, honking their horns and raising hell all night long.
Wow. Okay.
It was like an hour-long shifts. You would go do your 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. shift with your air horn, making it really uncomfortable. And we were doing the same things that you see folks doing in Minnesota, right? Like whistles and filming. But because we were doing it in a place that is important for Republicans to hold for the Senate, especially in 2026, it mattered in a different way. And particularly when some of our like local and state level old school Republicans started talking about how it was wrong, those background ties of getting them to speak out, I think probably is what really sent them packing. Although people should feel great about the work that they did. It took all of that demonstration of public upset, like frustration, anger, to drive those old school Republicans to say what they said. And that, I think, is what ultimately did it. But that's my opinion. I have literally no data behind that. That is like a pure, seems like this kind of reading the situation.
Anybody got a brother-in-law on ICE that we can check in with? Right? What happened there? And then the interesting thing to me, too, is like kind of the nameplate reason. So ICE tends to flood into a state because something bad happened and we have to get it under control. It's very dramatic, right? And the nameplate reason for North Carolina was this lady got shot on the subway.
Stabbed on the light rail.
Stabbed on the monorail, this Ukrainian refugee lady. So the nameplate reason was we have a white woman was killed, and so we need to go defend this place. And then what are they doing in Minneapolis? They're shooting white women in the face. So that's just an interesting little dynamic we've got going on there.
I think the storyline around the Ukrainian woman being stabbed on the light rail by an immigrant, like it perfectly aligned.
Right, an immigrant. I forgot. That's why it was.
Yeah.
If the white man does it, it's fine.
Oh, sure. Well, we let them do all kinds of shit. But it like aligned with a safety and security narrative that was already unfolding for a lot of state legislators candidates who were talking about the light rail and about lack of safety. And so it looked like ICE coming in was going to support the Republican calls for like a safer public transit system and like tying that back to immigrants. But it turned out that people felt that was a bridge too far and it was hurting the Republican cause, and then they left.
For the record, as a member of the white woman community, I'm against us getting stabbed on the monorail. I just don't really think that's an effective way to keep it from happening.
And we should work hard to make sure that people are safe. But in the same way that we don't extrapolate one white man killing a person to all white men are killers, we can't extrapolate one immigrant killing a person to all immigrants are killers. My background is in public health, and what we need to do is get at the root causes around what is making these trains less safe. A lot of it has to do with unhoused populations in Charlotte, untreated mental illness, lack of services, and you don't solve that, like you said, with a paramilitary organization.
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, we did this thing where we used to just like put mentally ill people in institutions and leave them there to rot. Like we used to do the dungeon approach, and then we're like, one flew over the cuckoo's nest, we can be done with that. But we didn't have a good thing to take its place. And so now you just live on the streets being untreated. And that's also not good for people with mental illness to be living on the streets untreated. Just eliminating public services clearly was not the move. And paramilitary is not a public service.
No.
We should talk about why ICE is doing this now. Because something I hear, because I work in agriculture, is people are always asking me, well, why are Republicans doing this? Farmers aren't going to have their workforce. How are they supposed to survive? Why are Republicans doing this to farmers? And the reason they're doing this now is they have a substitute labor force. So we should talk about that and how North Carolina actually played a key role in letting that happen, and how state and local elections in North Carolina played a key role in letting that happen. If you feel really big about activism, state and local elections are a thing you absolutely should pay attention to, because state and local elections made this happen. And it was a slow rolling affair. It took, 20 plus years, but state and local elections in North Carolina made this happen. So we should talk about that.
We really should. And you should start by explaining it to me like I'm 5.
It's all good. Okay. So undocumented workers in agriculture don't have documents. So there is a guest worker visa for farm workers. It's called H-2A. I think a lot of like white collar folks are familiar with, is it H-1B?
Yep.
It's H-1B for farm workers. It's H-2A. So like H-1B, it has that thing where it is tied to one employer. You don't have a visa to come out of the country and get a job. You have a visa to work for that employer that you've already been hired by. And so if you stop working with that employer, you have to leave the country, which means if the job sucks, you can't leave. So again, in the white collar world, we're having a lot of discussion about how tech bros love H-1B visas because captive labor.
Yep.
They got that from agriculture. If you want to bring in guest workers, we want to really limit their freedoms so they can't leave, because the whole point of importing guest workers is to have people who are easier to push around. Curiously to me, when Saudi Arabia did this, when your visa as a worker is tied to your employer, it's called the kafala system, that it means bonds or ties, and totally like in friendly social ties, not as in bondage. That would be crazy. And when Saudi Arabia does it, it's a human rights violation. But when the U.S. does it, that's just the H-1B and H-2A visas. So
yeah.
It's wild, because you'll hear farmers constantly complain about the H-2A program and how it's broken because it doesn't go far enough in allowing them to control people. Farm workers they have a lot of problems with the H-2A program because it goes way too far. It's an imperfect captive labor program that just pisses everybody off. And Congress is also working on revamping the H-2A system. And you have the Republicans on the Ag Committee who want to make it more captive labor. And you have Democrats who I think don't know what's going on. that's harsh. There's a big tradition of not making a big deal about how it's slavery until like, unless we have like a really active, like we're doing a push in a campaign right now, because if you don't have a very active campaign going behind it, all calling slavery does is piss people off, like the people you need to be negotiating with, like the people who actually run the farms. It's always been rather cagey. And so I don't know if they don't know what's going on, if they're just following like how farm workers have asked them to talk about it. You actually can't tell. So that's always like a fun dynamic. So let me be fair there. That is the thing that farm workers are like, please don't make a big deal about this unless like we actually have a clear path to immediate action, because all you're going to do is make our life worse. Shameless plug time. If you're liking this whole thing, give it a like, comment, subscribe, because that tells the algorithm to show it to more people. It really does help. Kate Barr is actively running for office right now. She's got a website. It's down in the description. And fun fact, if you feel like donating to a candidate, but you don't want to get on all the mailing lists for any reason, for example, they are legally, technically, and fully a Republican right now, you can just write them a check. And then there's no online donation site to harvest all your data and put you on the mailing lists. That way, only the candidate has your info to report it to the SEC. And Kate does not share her donor info. And in fact, most candidates don't, because they're like, no, those are my donors. You can't have them. So that's just a little handy backstage politics, how the sausage gets made info that's good for everybody. Back to the show. So Congress is working on reforming the H-2A system right now, which means wildly different things to different groups of people. As a farmer, the advantage of H-2A is when somebody comes to work on your farm, they are there until you're done with them. They can't leave. Because undocumented people who are farm workers, I like to call it freelance. Because yeah, that's what it is. Like functionally, is if the job sucks, they hit the bricks. And like that's part of being a migrant farm worker, is like you travel really from place to place. And so if a job is trash, you can leave. And oftentimes what employers would do is just kind of like try and intimidate people. Like if you leave, or if you're asking for more wages, I'm going to call ICE on you, right? A lot of intimidation and just counting on people to not know their rights. That's harder to do now with social media. People have easier access to knowing what their rights are. They have easier access to just leaving. There's also Uber and Lyft. So you can just get a gig on the gig economy if you need to. And so it is harder for employers to hang on to undocumented workers the way they're used to be able to do. They can't exploit them in the manner to which they become accustomed, which is why there's so much more attraction now to moving to H-2A. And of course, H-2A is sold to the public as it's a way to like actually secure the border and control the flow of people and vet these people and know who they are, which sounds amazing until you see how often people who are legally here on an H-2A visa get held basically in slavery. And these cases are incredibly hard to prosecute. Like if you've ever seen The Wire, right? You have to collect a ton of evidence. You have to establish a pattern. You have to find the person who's actually the kingpin of it all. And they work very hard to make sure it can't get traced back to them. So imagine that, but instead of cocaine and heroin, you're smuggling people who can lie when under pressure. So these cases are incredibly difficult to prosecute. However, they managed to crack a big one in southern Georgia. I actually worked in that area when the human trafficking thing was going on, and I worked with a farm who hired their own H-2A crew, which was really weird. So what farms will usually do, hiring H-2A workers is challenging. You have to fill all this paperwork. There's all this vetting. So like people say we like border security. That's called red tape.
Yeah, bureaucracy, right?
Yeah. And so the rubber hits the road and they're like, oh, I don't actually like this at all. You know, because the easy come easy nature of undocumented workers cuts both ways. It's really easy to hire them. You just call them, they show up, you hand them cash, boom, you're done. Whereas H-2A, there's like, it's like an international like movement of people. You got to do people with both countries. You have to document, yes, I tried to hire Americans. Here's why it didn't work. There's all kinds of tricks people use to say they tried to hire Americans, but didn't actually. And so they can get foreign workers. That's a
whole other thing. Yep.
Sometime last year, there was that ad circulating about like blueberry pickers wanted. It was $11 an hour, like 17 hours a day.
Yes.
And people were like, who would take that job? That's not how blueberry farms work. The H-2A workers are getting paid $14 to $16 an hour, depending on where you are. And you're probably not working that many hours. You must have really screwed up your crew size if it's working like that. So that is an ad that is designed to check a box. So you can say, I tried to hire Americans and it didn't work. That ad is intended to dissuade people. So you can say you tried. Yeah. So there's this whole process you have to go through as a farmer. A lot of farmers are not into that. Also, you might only need to hire workers for 6 weeks. It's like logistically, seriously not worth it. And so what they will do instead is, there was a guy in North Carolina who got busted for smuggling weed. And so he switched to hiring H-2A workers and renting them out to farmers. His name was Stan Urie. There was a big article about him years ago from BuzzFeed, RIP. I'll link it in the whatever that we're going to have here. He got caught smuggling weed from Mexico, right? And so he just decided to move something that was a little bit more like hard to get in trouble with legally. And that turned out to be workers. So what he figured out was, if I can go through this H-2A paperwork process and I can hire people, I can have them all season long and I can just hire them out across, my county or my state. So basically, in a best case scenario, that's just a temp agency. That's fine, right?
Right.
There's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. But, the life of drug trafficking doesn't necessarily teach you like good HR skills.
Right.
So you can imagine things kind of went off the tracks in due time. And that became the business model that H2A actually followed. Instead of the farmers hiring their own crews and going through all that paperwork, it became you find a temp agency who's going to rent people for you and they do the paperwork. This is why Republicans are comfortable deporting undocumented workers now, because they have an alternative. The H2A business, that one guy in North Carolina who started out this rent a worker business model, that was 20-ish years ago, maybe getting up to 30 now. And so lots of people copied his business model. So there is now enough of a rental H2A worker business to really replace undocumented workers. And that's where a lot of the shady business happens, is the contractors will, charge people recruiting fees, which they're not supposed to do. So like, give me $2,000 so I can do the paperwork for you. Not supposed to do that. Take their passports so they can't leave. Give them a lot of like nonsense about how what we're doing is fine. Don't call the police. Don't call the DOJ or the Department of Labor or anything. You have no recourse. So they lie to the people a lot. The current wrinkle that they're really exploring right now is hashtag not all H2A contractors. There's good ones out there, but there's so little enforcement, you have no reason to be a good one. So the big thing they're exploring right now is, because there's all this documentation, you know exactly who they are and where they're from. Like you have their social security number, whatever the version is in Mexico. You've got crime buddies back in Mexico and you're just like, hey, Joe Garcia's not doing what he's supposed to be doing today. Go beat up his wife. And so that's a big tactic of control we've been finding in multiple H2A cases, right? There's people being forced to work at gunpoint, being kept in squalid conditions, and being charged crazy money for that housing, being fed really inadequate food, like one bologna sandwich a day for hard labor. They're not getting enough water. Serious dehydration, you get heat stroke, but if it's chronic, you wind up with kidney stones because there's just too much salt in your body and it starts precipitating in your kidneys, right? So a lot of people go home from these work trips with kidney stones and kidney damage, which is absolutely crazy because like people don't work faster when they're dehydrated
Or starving.
And we can kind of get into this because I see this happening in ICE too, right? There's a lot of the way these things are run is very like, I'm a big bad boy, and that's why I'm not letting people have water because we're badasses over here. Well, nobody goes faster when they're dehydrated. No one goes faster when they're dizzy because of heat stroke. So that is the opposite of an effective operation and getting your job done in a timely manner. And so a lot of the nonsense that's happening in the world around us right now is not even driven by profit. Like that actually kind of makes me crazy. If they were profit driven, they'd be giving people water.
Yes. And more than a bologna sandwich.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like at least oatmeal. Like, come on.
Something that'll stick with you for several hours. Yeah. But, I mean, we joke, but like this is horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like there's, I can again link to it below.
Yeah.
There was a huge case in South Georgia that was busted, and I was actually working with some other farmers in South Georgia who were not using those H2A crews. Like they hired their own H2A crew. Like they had a guy working for them full time who was like, yeah, I drive myself down to the consulate of Mexico. I pick the people up personally and we drive back because if you have any gaps in your system, if you have anybody else you're depending on to get your workers to you, they will be extorting them for money. It will become a human trafficking operation if you leave any space for that to happen. And he's like kind of laying this out for me. I'm like, this guy's really into it. And I was like, what's going on with this? Because most people just hire a contractor and they're like, oh, they're all up to some crazy business. And then a couple years later, there's the biggest human trafficking bust in the 21st century US is in southern Georgia in agriculture. So everybody knew.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to take it back to ICE, this is why Republicans are comfortable deporting undocumented workers now, because they have an alternative. The H2A business, that one guy in North Carolina who started out this rent a worker business model, it was 20-ish years ago, maybe getting up to 30 now. So lots of people copied his business model. So there is now enough of a rental H2A worker business to really replace undocumented workers. So this is part of an effort to force people who are in undocumented labor out of the country so we can transition to H2A, which is not a great program right now. And we can also get into how it's not good for world economies, but I just want to let this breathe for a second. That is what's going on. There is a reason.
And it also, ICE and ICE activities like serve many purposes for this government, right? It's intimidation. We talk a lot about voter suppression. If you make your government look really scary, it's easier to make people feel scared to go vote. Now, you have been clear that people need to get over themselves and still go vote because they can't actually do anything to you. But the whole point is to make people afraid. The whole point is to drive out laborers who can actually make choices and leave so that you can get cheaper trapped labor, and you can make voters and citizens who disagree with what you're doing feel afraid to speak up.
I don't want to discount like, oh no, you're scared to getting arrested is not a good thing, especially if you might be processed in one of these dungeons where you don't know how long it takes to get out. Even if you do have papers, you have no guarantee they're actually going to take a look in a timely fashion. I do not want to discount that. There are folks for whom this is way less of a risk, right? Yes. Like, I just don't know any more eloquent way to say, like, if you have a country that is under this kind of occupation, it's time to develop some courage. There's really no way around this without having courage. And sometimes that means walking past a scary looking guy. Sometimes like it can be as little as that. I think we're always looking for a big dramatic moment, and a lot of the actual change in life comes from a lot of small stuff put together. And I know that's not very satisfying, but it is what it is. And we can kind of get into the impact of voting in state and local elections, perhaps.
Yeah.
But if you have any thoughts on like, the importance of state and local elections, because you're running for one right now.
State and local elections. So I'm running for Congress to go to the U.S. House because we are completely gerrymandered in North Carolina, which makes a lot of our state House and state Senate races like so locked down that even when voters are pissed, it's difficult for them to hold their leaders accountable. State and local elections matter so much for a whole variety of reasons, but largely because in North Carolina, at least, our state legislature is so powerful. It is in control of so many things that affect people's daily lives. Like our state legislature has been driving down corporate tax. They're driving personal income tax, state income tax towards zero. We've been losing tax revenue as more people have been moving to the state. And so municipalities are getting less money from the state government, which means they have to raise property taxes to pay for the police and the fire and the water to cover all the new people who've arrived in their area. Iredell County's property tax went up 28% in 2023. That is an insane amount of money for most people. It's already hard enough for people to buy homes. We already talked about the safety of the light rail system in Charlotte. That's really a local government problem to solve. That is not a problem for ICE to solve. That is not a problem for even our state legislature to solve. That is a problem for Charlotte to solve because that light rail exists in Charlotte only. And they could work on it. Now, I'm not saying Charlotte city government has it all figured out. They definitely do not. But that is why it matters so much, right? Like you have to go vote in these local elections and you have to make sure that the people you're voting for are going to do what you want them to do, regardless of their letter.
I want to talk about how local and state elections impact this ICE situation we're seeing right now. There's the local police issue. Again, talk about how this business model, this H-2A renting out workers business model emerged in North Carolina. There's two offices in the state that are supposed to regulate how farm workers are treated. Commissioner of Labor enforces labor regulations like housing, all that stuff, wage, etc. The Commissioner of Agriculture is in charge of training farmers how to treat labor properly. There's the worker-facing Department of Labor, and there's the farmer-facing Department of Agriculture. The people of North Carolina, in their wisdom, have been electing a lot of Republicans for these two positions. A lot of that is because Republicans have built themselves a brand of, we understand agriculture. We're the ones who are good at business. So an interesting thing that you will see in North Carolina is Democratic voters who vote for a Democrat for every single position down the ballot will cross over and vote Republican for Commissioner of Agriculture. The number of people that I had when I was running for office at Democratic events, like when we were canvassing, come up to me and say, you know what? I've always voted Republican for this one position. And these were people at Democratic canvassing events, right? And so just imagine how many people are like less engaged who are also doing this thing. And they would say, the reason I do that is so I can tell my friends I'm nonpartisan. You are the people who kept this man in power. If you look at the voting map, it's only Democrats in the suburbs around Raleigh who do this. The ones in Charlotte don't do that. It's specifically a Raleigh thing. I think a lot of the people who are at the protests against ICE voted for Republican for this. They've been voting for Republican for 20 years who made this stuff possible. And a lot of people are doing similar crossovers with labor. Here in North Carolina, the person who, for whatever reason, the Commissioner of Labor also inspects the elevators. And so every time you go in an elevator, there's their little face smiling at you and their signature. And so if you've ever been in an elevator and you didn't die, you feel like this person is doing a good job. In reality, the Commissioner of Labor is usually a Republican who works for the poultry companies. That's what they're actually doing. The elevator thing is just their advertising strategy. And like, if you actually look at the donations they take and the political decisions that they are making, it is very much in line with industrial agriculture interests. And so the disconnect is wild. And I know in most states we don't like this position, so it's way more things to keep track of. But state and local elections matter so much. We would not be having ICE invading cities right now if voters in North Carolina did not have this habit of voting for Republicans for state level offices, because Republicans have a better brand there. And so I'm really excited that people are on the streets protesting, the people organized. I want you to imagine talking to somebody who is in one of these ICE dungeons and telling them, I came out when it was too late, but in the last 20 years, I voted to make this happen. I know it doesn't feel very dramatic to get out there and vote, but I want you to really think about connecting the dots. Imagine speaking to a person and telling them that you made this decision and why. Or I didn't bother to get out and vote because I just didn't think it was that important. ICE invading cities does not just come out of nowhere. This was 20 years of buildup empowered by state and local voters here in North Carolina specifically. So having run for that position last year, right, it was wild to watch all these people turn out and go like, oh, I really care about this. Because when I was talking to y'all about it last year, it was like rain bouncing off a brick. Yeah. As someone who's like been out there trying to be an elected leader, like to represent the will of the people and to see where the priorities really are, that's just been very, very tough to stomach and to watch. So yeah, let me just lay that on y'all.
And And I think that's happening. Like, it is so frustrating that we have to like live through this pain for it to matter. Whatever. It's the little kid has to touch the hot stove analogy. Like, sometimes I feel like the collective populace is kind of toddler level about risks in their electoral choices. That's probably unfair, but it's just these dominoes do line up. It's not a Chicken Little situation. The sky really is going to fall. It's sort of this like balancing the checkbook. It's like balancing their ballot that North Carolina voters in particular, this is like a documented phenomenon, love to choose a couple of places to pick a Republican. And unfortunately, we seem to consistently pick the same places, like over and over and over again. I'm somebody who actually loves that we elect judges. I love that we elect council of state. I like when more power is in voters' hands, but it also means that voters have to do their work. One of the things that has been really interesting about running as a fake Republican is how much the Republican Party in this district, in District 14, have had to tell their voters, make sure you research, decide. Because for so long, both parties have been like, you need to go straight down the ticket. Like, don't think too hard. Pick all the Dems or pick all the Rs, whatever. The Republicans are better at following that instruction, generally speaking, I believe, but that's neither here nor there. And I really think we've entered an era where it's not just like a D versus R. It's also as things were and something new, right? Voters, like, it is a responsibility to vote, and you shouldn't go in blind. And if we can put pressure on that system to kind of force people to engage, because I get it, life is busy, and voting, those ballots don't make it easy, especially when you've got like pages to go through. Primaries are especially tough for people because it can be difficult to figure out where people stand because those candidates don't have a ton of money. They don't have endorsements from either party. Like, generally speaking, you know, the Democratic Party doesn't endorse in a primary and the Republican Party doesn't endorse in a primary. My guess is that's going to change for my primary here, but people are really on their own. And so a lot of times I think they opt out because they feel like they don't totally understand, or they don't even realize the election is happening. And if you're going to go vote, you better know what you're doing.
Yeah. Folks kind of talk about, I don't think it's really possible to get down to the nitty gritty of every single candidate. Like, there are so many, right? I would say my rubric is, you know, the only times I would consider, if there's a party that generally aligns with your values, if you don't have any other information, go for that. If you don't have a reason to not vote for the party, you better have a real good reason. And that will happen from time to time. It's usually with local elections where I know the person. Not I looked at their website, but I know that person and I know they're a piece of shit.
Yep.
That's when I don't vote for them, you know? That's what it takes for me to make that decision because, again, we're in a purple state, and so there's no like, oh, my vote doesn't matter. Our vote matters like way too much to be cavalier with it here in North Carolina.
Yeah.
I have to know that person, not know about them. I have to know that person and have real beef with them, you know, to not do that. So if there's a party that generally aligns with your values and you're going down and you're trying to figure out which person, like, why would you, or,
right.
You know,
Don't just higgledy-piggledy go, right?
I just kind of break it down to, like, what do I believe in? I believe everybody should have a fair chance in life. Who you're born to shouldn't decide your life. Trans rights.
Yep.
There's really no question which party aligns with that. Is it perfect? No. But it's kind of like, I need to pound a nail. Am I going to try and use a wrench or a pair of pliers? Neither of them is a hammer, but the wrench is going to work a lot better.
Yes, that's actually an amazing analogy. The donor thing is so interesting because if you are then the state party and you're trying to keep staff on so that you can build infrastructure in off-cycle years, you have to speak to the donor priorities. Otherwise, you can't keep your staff. So we are like back now to campaign finance reform. It's a whole journey, Sarah.
Well, the funniest thing, too, is people talk about campaign finance and like money in politics like it's the only thing that sways people's opinion in an inordinate way. And I'm like, look, you want to know why most rural America is red? Number one, it's not. About a third of rural America votes blue. Let's start there. The rest of them, it's because every rural county has 1 to 5 families that own the county. They are the employers. They choose who's on all the county commissions. You know, they choose which projects get greenlit. They choose who gets permitting. They run the entire economy. If you speak out against them, there's one down in Bladen County. They own a check cashing service. And so there's a lot of poor people in Bladen County. And if you start a bank account, they will kick you out of your rental housing that they own because they want you to use their check cashing service. So it's not just employment. They run every everything. So imagine the kind of political sway that they have if you can do that to people. If you speak a word against these people out of line, you'll lose your job, you lose your housing, your family loses their job, your family loses their housing. You can't start a business without their permission.
Right.
And they're all big money hereditary families, so they're conservative because they don't want to pay taxes. That's why rural America is red. They never have to spend a dime to get people to vote their way. So people talk about getting the money out of politics. You're like, that's sweet that you think the problem is money in politics.
I think there's so many problems. The big problem is there are so many problems and we have to chip away at each one. You may not want to include this because it's like a long story.
I want to respect your time here, but...
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll go in a couple minutes. I just could talk to you all day long. So I was speaking at this conference and I had the pleasure of presenting about the work that we're doing, that the Can't Win Victory Fund, which is like my political nonprofit, that we're doing in unwinnable districts in North Carolina. I made a dick joke to kick it off, as one does, trying to loosen up the room, I guess. I was immediately followed by the former president of Tibet living in exile in Boston, who was talking about wars for water. So different vibes. And
We're on the whole spectrum.
my mom would have been so proud. Anyway. His name is Lobsang Sangay, and I was talking to him later that night at like this like speaker gathering thing and essentially apologizing for both swearing and making dick jokes in front of him leading into his presentation. And he's like, no, we are the same. And I was like, shut up, Lobsang, we are not the same. But you are also the same as Lobsang and probably everybody who's watching this. And what he was saying is people always ask him, when will Tibet be free? And he's like, that is the wrong question. He said, the question is, what can I do today that will make sure that Tibet is ready to be free as soon as it can be? And he was like, you take the torch that you can carry and you carry it as far as you can carry it. And if people come with you, that's great, but maybe they don't. And that's fine too. You have to carry your torch as far as you can go. And he was like, you wake up each day, he talking to me, and you ask, what can I do to make sure that North Carolina is ready for fair maps as soon as they can be? And you're going to carry that torch as far as you have to. Might be your lifetime, might not be, you just don't know. You can't answer that. That is outside of your control. What is inside of your control is what you can do that day to make sure the place you care about or the thing that you care about is ready for the outcome you're hoping for. And like, it helps me so much right now because there are so many problems. This system is pretty messed up in a whole bunch of ways, and it has been messed up for a lot longer than Donald Trump has frankly even been alive. We have never had a democracy that works for everyone. In some moments, like barely had a democracy at all. All we can do is keep like striving for the version of democracy that we think best represents our values. And like, I probably won't see that democracy. Maybe we'll get a little better along the way. And then someday, maybe someone will see that democracy. Maybe it's my kids, maybe it's their grandkids, who knows? Hopefully we haven't set the planet on fire before then. So like, that's the kind of stuff that I hold on to when I think about absolutely everything that is going wrong kind of all the time right now.
The thing I keep looking back to is we're in the South, and so there was slavery, there was abolition, there was Jim Crow, there was a civil rights movement. In 1900, 1890, 1920, 1930, 1940, how much hope do you think there really looked like there was?
Yeah.
People spent lifetimes working on this stuff anyway. They didn't let the fact that there was oftentimes probably zero light at the end of the tunnel. They said, so what? Then we have to build the tunnel, right?
Right.
And, you know, not to be glib about that, but I think it's really easy to get really despondent now because things have kind of taken a drastic downward turn within our lifetime, right? And so we feel like this is the worst it's ever been, and we don't have a playbook for this. We have been through so much as a country. It's a little bit time out of mind, but there are people who have walked this path before. We are not alone. And yeah, I think like there's just such a feeling of we're alone, and that is absolutely not the case. You're not alone right now. There are 100 million plus Americans who are also enraged, not alone. And also in time, you are not alone. There are people who walked a path with really probably not a lot of hope, and they had to make that themselves, right? And if they can feel like there was a point in 1910's rural South, then I don't really have a whole lot of grounds to go, I don't know, this doesn't feel like it's gonna work.
And like, people are walking around like there are too many things, I don't know what to do. Like, just do something. Just pick a thing and do that thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a blood oath to see that one thing you've chosen today all the way through to completion. Pick things until you find the one that feels most meaningful to you and keep doing that thing. And that's your torch, and you're going to carry that torch. And then the thing that you hope is if everybody is doing something, then everybody is picking up a torch and you don't have to carry all of them.
Yeah.
You get yours. yours.
Yeah, groundswell, tsunamis are one water molecule at a time. I know it's cheesy, but like it's a thing.
We need a little cheesy right now. Like we need a little schmaltzy. We need some chat GPT, like motivational quotes. I think people are like really struggling. If you need a motivational poster on your wall that's like teamwork makes the dream work, then please hang that up, whatever it is.
Yeah, if you're looking for a big dramatic moment, that may never happen. Groundswells come from lots and lots and lots of little things piled on top of each other. I just kind of tell people like real deep change feels like nothing, 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 boom, all at once.
Yes.
So if you think about it that way, we're right on schedule.
Yeah. There will be some history book that talks about this time and then the all at once that came after it. And it will seem like it all makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever wondered, like, man, what did it feel like to live through the Great Depression, through World War II? Like, because we had a lot of time in the late 20th century when it felt like nothing ever happens anymore. In the first 10, 20 years of the 21st century, it just feels like nothing ever happens anymore. And now we're experiencing what it feels like to live in a time where things are happening and we don't like it very much.
Yeah.
But
my nervous system is on tilt. Like, I agree. I don't like it either. Let's move forward into a place where, like, I can watch my HGTV shows again.
Historical times feel overwhelming. That's part of it. And, you know, like you said, pick your thing. I've picked agriculture. That's my thing. And you have to talk about the current events, but also, like, here's the background so you understand what these current events mean. We're talking about H2A and, like, farm labor. That's my thing. That's got me kind of overwhelmed. But nobody else is covering that. So that's something where I can actually do something. Life is a mosaic. This is a piece that is necessary to finish the picture and nobody else can do it. So life is a mosaic. You don't have to be the whole picture. Pick your tile. Do that. And
yes. And just give it your best shot. And then also we need to like sleep and feed ourselves.
Yeah, that's key. Yes.